Okay, I've been asked a question which is what's the difference between a remote spray collar and an e-collar, and under which circumstances would you use or recommend the use of either? I'm going to keep this quite brief because I I have a tendency to go off at tangents, so I'm going to try and make it as brief as possible. A remote spray collar is a box which is remotely operated. The box sits on the collar that the dog wears and is filled with compressed air, a little bit like you'd fill a cigarette lighter with compressed gas, so that can then be ignited. So a remote spray collar fills with compressed air, which you then push a button on the remote control, and through a small hole in the top of the collar it emits a blast, a jet of that compressed air, which comes out in sort of like cloud form beneath the chin of the dog. The range on them is round about, it can be anywhere between 75 and about 200 to 300 meters. They're battery operated. Usually they're battery operated as in by disposable batteries, although I do believe there are a few models that are available that utilize rechargeable batteries. So if you're going to go for a spray collar, make sure that you go for one that uses rechargeable batteries, even though the ones that I used to use, which were the Dynavet products, which are now Martin Celia, and the remote spray commanders, the Jet Care spray commanders, they use disposable batteries and they eat through them for a pastime. So if you are thinking of a remote spray collar, then try and invest in one that uses rechargeable batteries. The batteries aren't cheap either for the ones that rely on the disposables. So what's the main difference? Okay, the main difference is that a remote spray collar cannot be adjusted. It basically is what it is. It delivers a blast of air beneath the chin of the dog, and once that air is being delivered, that's what's happening. You cannot make that shorter or greater by use of the remote control in your hand. You also can't make it come out just a tiny little distance or come out a longer distance at the time of pressing it. What you can do on some models is have a half second or a second of the air being blasted, but the actual core of the collar itself, the jet of spray that comes out, is exactly the same. It can't be adjusted. A remote spray collar is a punitive tool. It is used to correct via interruption, via startle, behaviours that the owner considers to be detrimental in some way or other to either themselves, the dog, or the relationship between the two. And it is a punitive tool. That is all it's capable of doing. So which circumstances would you use it? The dog steals food off the counter in the kitchen. Just as the dog steps up to take the food, you push a button, blast of air comes out, the dog thinks, crikey, you know, the kitchen worktop's capable of delivering blasts of air, and you go and it tries again, you put a chicken on the side, the dog goes in, thinks, oh, I'll try this, and just as you go up, blast of air comes out. Oh my goodness gracious me, I can't go anywhere near that worktop. It's or I certainly can't try and jump up at it, because it can bite back via a way of compressed air. For some dogs, extremely effective. For other dogs, complete and utter waste of time, because depending on the individualness of the animal and the circumstances and the reinforcement history of the behaviour, breed, length of hair, all these things have an impact on whether or not a spray collar is going to be effective. And at somewhere between 75 to 150 quid a shot, really I'd want to have some of those boxes ticked with some form of reliability before I make that investment. But that is what a remote spray collar does. You push a button, it delivers a consequence, which is either negative or not, depending on the animal, for the behaviour that has just been performed. An e-collar, the difference between a remote spray collar and an e-collar is an e-collar uses a tactile sensation, a stimulation, it can also be used in a punitive sense, by which I mean that the animal performs a behaviour, an e-collar is presented. The sensation from an e-collar is presented as a negative consequence to what that animal's just done. The difference being is that an e-collar is massively adjustable. Okay, so that sensation can go up, way up, or it can go way down, depending on the animal, depending on the state of arousal in the particular context that the collar is being used. Generally, their range is far greater. They normally sit around, if you're looking at quality e-collars, they normally sit around half a mile up. They're not affected by things like weather conditions. If I'm using, like today, it's a windy day today, if I'm using a spray collar on a dog at 200 meters in a strong headwind, that spray collar has lost its effect, because the propulsion of the spray from the collar is probably not enough in compared to the wind that's coming in, and the dog isn't going to feel it. So therefore I've now taught my dog that it's okay in certain situations to ignore certain commands or to carry out behaviours which have normally been punished, normally carried a negative consequence, you can get away with it because the wind is strong. You know, and also they can run out of air. You know, they can run out of compressed air, and then you've got a dog that's capable of, sometimes I can do it, sometimes I can't, but I don't know that because there's nothing on my remote control to tell me what the air level is like, or you know what the reservoir of compressed air is like on the collar, so I don't know whether it's going to run out or not. So there's a few things with the spray collars which aren't too good really, and I'll just briefly mention the fact that you can get them scented with citronella or scented with mustard, so that this cloud of air comes out and now it stinks. I don't agree with it. Because I consider it to be excessive. Unless it's something which is, you know, you are really, really talking about the welfare of that animal and you want it to become a really sort of negative association. The use of citronella is a poorly thought out idea, or mustard is a poorly thought out idea by the designers and manufacturers of the collars. The reason being is that it doesn't really give the dog any opportunity to perform an alternative behaviour other than the one that it just got punished for which it isn't punished. Because if you squirt citronella into your hair, you'll smell that citronella the following day. Unless you wash your hair, you'll smell that citronella the following day. So me as a dog, I've just received this citronella blast that stinks for doing a particular thing, and now everything else I've been doing for the next 24 hours also stinks. So it's not really very good in terms of communication. It can be quite confusing. It can make us feel good as the human beings, because as a naturally punitive species, you might think, yeah, you know, that's more distasteful for you than odourless air. But I'm not a fan of scented air. Odourless air, yeah, fine. You know, they work on startle. That's the whole way that they work, is exactly the same as the punitive aspects of an e-collar. That also works on startle. But I'm not mad keen on the idea of scented sprays for remote training collars, spray collars, remote spray collars. The thing with an e-collar as well, just very, very quickly, is for something to be punitive, for something to have a punitive capacity, the dog performs a particular behaviour, and as a direct consequence of that, something negative happens. That's your spray collar, and that's one aspect of the e-collar. There's also a form of learning called negative reinforcement, which is that by doing something, by me performing a particular behaviour, something that I dislike or something that I find undesirable in my environment is removed. So it's going to make it happen more often. A prime example of this is that if I go outside and I get soaking wet because it's pouring down, I put up an umbrella. So I put up an umbrella to remove the feeling of getting wet. An e-collar allows for the sensation to be delivered at the time of a dog performing, or immediately prior to a dog performing a particular act, performing a particular behaviour, which encourages the dog to then perform another behaviour to rid that sensation, to rid itself of that environmental stimulus, if you like. So it can help teach, it can help strengthen behaviours, particularly if you've got a behaviour that the dog already pretty much understands. So I've got a pretty decent sit, but in this situation, you know, my sit isn't particularly good, or, you know, I'd rather do this, that and the other. The use of negative reinforcement, the use of pressure to encourage that sit. If you think of somebody who puts their hand on the backside of a dog and pushes it down into the sit, or somebody who, I don't know, perhaps puts the hand behind the shoulders and pushes the dog into a down and then rewards the dog when the dog's in a down, that's pressure. That's pressure. That's working. The dog's working via negative reinforcement. It's working to remove itself in response to, and to remove the pressure that is being exerted upon it. An e-collar is capable of doing exactly the same thing. It's capable of teaching a dog new behaviours, of encouraging new behaviours, because it's not being used in a level high enough to be considered punitive. A spray collar cannot do that.